Imagine a world where a single document could ignite a revolution. That's the world Martin Luther was born into in 1483. Luther's birthplace, Eisleben, Germany, was a bustling mining town, but his family's life was far from prosperous. His father, Hans, was a miner, while his mother, Margaret, was known for her hard work and virtue. Young Luther was a keen learner, and his parents saw education as a means for a better life. This led him to the University of Erfurt, where he studied law. However, a brush with death in a thunderstorm led him to make a vow to St. Anne. If he survived, he'd become a monk. True to his word, Luther entered the Augustinian monastery in Erfurt in 1505. Here he began to question the practices of the Catholic Church, particularly the selling of indulgences. With a mind filled with questions and a heart yearning for answers, Luther was on a path that would lead him to challenge the very foundations of the church he served. October 31st, 1517, a date that would forever be etched in the annals of history. It was on this day that Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the All Saints' Church in Wittenberg. This audacious act was more than a mere protest. It was a clarion call for reform. The 95 Theses were a meticulous dissection of the Catholic Church's practices and beliefs. Luther's primary qualm was the sale of indulgences, a practice where the church sold certificates, promising the buyer or their loved ones a reduced punishment in purgatory. Luther saw this as a blatant manipulation of faith for monetary gain. In his Theses, Luther argued that salvation was a free gift from God, granted through faith, and not something to be bought or sold. He also contended that the Pope had no authority to release souls from purgatory. These were radical thoughts for the time, challenging the very foundations of the Church's power and authority. But Luther didn't stop there. He also criticized the Church's lack of transparency, its opulence, and its deviation from the teachings of the Bible. He was calling for a return to a simpler, more authentic form of Christianity. The 95 Theses were written in Latin, the language of the scholars and the clergy, yet they were quickly translated into German, making them accessible to the common people. This allowed Luther's ideas to spread, sparking discussions and debates far and wide. Luther's bold act was a catalyst for change. It was a statement, a challenge to the Church to reform itself. His theses were not just criticisms, but also suggestions for a more just, more faithful practice of Christianity. But this was just the beginning. Luther's theses were the spark that ignited a larger fire. His act of defiance was a rallying cry for those disenchanted with the Church's corruption and abuse of power. Luther's act of defiance was about to shake the very foundations of the Catholic Church. His 95 Theses were not just an indictment of the Church's practices, but an announcement of a new era in Christian history. News of Luther's audacious act spread like wildfire, fueled by the recently invented printing press. This technological marvel of the time played a vital role in disseminating Luther's revolutionary ideas far and wide. It was a time of change, an era of questioning, and the printing press was the perfect tool to amplify the reach of Luther's discontent with the Catholic Church. Luther's 95 Theses were more than just a list of grievances. They were a bold challenge, a call to reform, and a rallying cry for those who shared his frustration. Each thesis was a spark, ready to ignite the flame of change, and together they formed a compelling argument that attracted attention and sparked widespread debate. The theses were quickly translated from Latin, the language of the academics and clergy, into German, the language of the common people. This translation was pivotal, as it allowed Luther's ideas to reach a much broader audience, stirring up a storm of controversy and discussion. The common people, who had long been under the yoke of the Church's authority, found resonance in Luther's revolutionary ideas. The theses were not just shared among the academics and the clergy, but they also found their way into the homes of ordinary people, across public squares, and into the hearts of those yearning for change. The debate they sparked was not confined to hushed whispers in the corridors of power. It spilled onto the streets, reaching every corner of society. As Luther's ideas spread, they found fertile ground in the hearts of the disgruntled and the discontented. His bold challenge to the Church's authority, his emphasis on the primacy of Scripture, and his belief in salvation through faith alone resonated deeply with many. His words were a beacon of hope, a promise of a spiritual future free from the chains of indulgence and corruption. Luther had lit the spark. The flame of the Protestant Reformation was about to ignite. Luther's ideas resonated with the common people, igniting a revolution that was to become the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation was more than just a religious upheaval. It was a seismic shift that challenged the established order and brought about a new era of spiritual freedom. As Luther's teachings spread, they found fertile ground in the hearts of those who were disillusioned with the Catholic Church's corruption and abuse of power. The ordinary folks, the merchants, the nobles, they all began to question the Church's authority and its monopoly over spiritual matters. The Reformation led to the birth of various Protestant denominations. Each of these new branches of Christianity interpreted Luther's principles in their own unique way. Some focused on predestination, others on the sacraments, but all echoed Luther's core belief in salvation through faith alone and the authority of the Bible. This explosion of new denominations didn't just stay within the borders of Germany, it spread far and wide, across Europe and beyond. Countries like England, Scotland, and the Netherlands all saw the rise of Protestantism, each adapting Luther's teachings to their own cultural and political contexts. The map of Europe was being redrawn, not with borders of nations, but with lines of belief. Throughout this time, the Catholic Church was facing an upheaval it had never expected. The authority it once held unchallenged was now being questioned at every turn. The Church's response, a period known as the Counter-Reformation, was an attempt to reclaim lost ground and reaffirm its spiritual authority. But the genie was out of the bottle. The Protestant Reformation had started a fire that couldn't be extinguished. It had given people a taste of spiritual freedom, a glimpse of a faith that was personal and direct, unmediated by a corrupt institution. It was a revolution of the mind, the heart, and the soul, and its echoes can still be heard today. The Reformation was more than just a religious revolution. It was a catalyst for cultural, social, and political changes. Martin Luther's bold challenge against the Catholic Church shook the very foundations of society, sparking a wave of transformation that reached far beyond the confines of religion. In the wake of the Reformation, the world witnessed an unprecedented shift in power dynamics. Authority, once concentrated in the hands of the Church, was challenged and dispersed. The monopoly of the Catholic Church over spiritual matters was no longer unassailable. This transition led to the decentralization of religious power, with various Protestant denominations emerging and gaining influence. The Reformation also ushered in an era of intellectual curiosity. Luther's emphasis on the individual's direct relationship with God, without the need for an intervening clergy, encouraged people to read and interpret the Bible for themselves. This newfound independence in thought and interpretation led to a surge in literacy rates, as people sought to read the Bible in their own language. Moreover, the Reformation played a pivotal role in encouraging critical thinking. Luther's audacious challenge against the Church's practices incited others to question authority, leading to a culture of debate and discussion. This spirit of inquiry extended beyond religion, influencing the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, periods marked by great advancements in science, philosophy, and human rights. The political landscape was not left untouched by the Reformation. As the Church's authority waned, the power of the state increased. Kings and queens found themselves with more autonomy, setting the stage for the rise of nation-states. The Reformation, in a sense, laid the groundwork for modern democracy, as it advocated for the voice and choice of the individual. This seismic shift in religious, cultural, social, and political spheres was not without its challenges. The Reformation sparked religious wars, persecutions, and divisions that left a lasting impact on the world. Yet these tumultuous times also led to the emergence of religious tolerance and the concept of freedom of conscience, shaping the principles of modern democratic societies. Today, the legacy of the Reformation is evident in our world. It's in the multitude of Protestant denominations that exist, each with its own interpretation of faith. It's in our democratic societies, where authority is constantly questioned and freedom of thought is valued. It's in our culture of critical thinking and the importance we place on education and literacy. Today, as we look back on the Reformation, we see a movement that not only reshaped the religious landscape, but also redefined the relationship between individuals and their faith. Martin Luther's act of defiance sparked a revolution that continues to reverberate through our society, reminding us of the power of courage, conviction, and the quest for truth.